I'll give a countdown: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The subcommittee will come to order. I want to welcome everyone to today's Department of Defense Information Technology, Digital Developments, and Artificial Intelligence for fiscal year 2023 hearing. Um, just some housekeeping things before I give my official opening statement. We've obviously convened this as a hybrid hearing, so just to uh, for formality, members who are joining remotely must be visible on screen for the purposes of identity verification, establishing and maintaining a quorum, participating in the proceeding, and voting. Those members must continue to use the software platform's video function while in attendance unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render them unable to participate on camera. If a member experiences technical difficulties, they should contact the committee staff for assistance. Video of members' participation will be broadcast in the room and via the television, internet feeds. Members participating remotely must seek recognition verbally, and they are asked to mute their microphones when they are not speaking. Members who are participating remotely are reminded to keep the software platform's video function on the entire time they attend the proceeding. Members may leave and rejoin the proceeding. If members depart for a short while for reasons other than joining a different proceeding, they should leave the video function on. If members will be absent for a significant period or depart to join a different proceeding, they should exit the software platform entirely and then rejoin if they return. Members may use the software platform's chat feature in communication to communicate with staff regarding technical or logistical support issues only. Finally, I've designated a committee staff member to, if necessary, mute unrecognized members' microphones to cancel any inadvertent background noise that may disrupt the proceeding. With that, today we are joined by Mr. John Sherman, the DoD Chief Information Officer, serving concurrently as the interim Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Officer. He is joined by Ms. Margaret Palmieri, the Deputy Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Officer, and Dr. Kelly Fletcher, the Principal Deputy Chief Information Officer. I welcome our witnesses today. The position of the Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Officer is a new one at the Department of Defense, effective as of February. The CDAO will serve as the department's senior official responsible for strengthening, integrating data, artificial intelligence, and digital solutions, and at its outset assumed responsibility for the three pre-existing entities that our members will be familiar with: the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, or the JAIC, the Office of the Chief Data Officer, and the Defense Digital Service. While Mr. Sherman has appeared before us previously, he did so in his CIO capacity, and today marks the inaugural appearance of the CDAO in front of Congress. For as long as I have served on this committee, there has been a bicameral and bipartisan push to elevate the role technology plays in the department and to disassemble the artificial stovepipes that exist within the sprawling bureaucracy. In bringing the CIO and CDAO together today, the committee is making clear precisely how important of a role technology plays in warfare and that no single leader can manage it all. So, from data to operationalizing artificial intelligence to building resilience in our networks, these topics are just too vital to be foisted onto a single official's already full plate. So I applaud the department's leadership for taking this first step in creating the CDAO. Next comes that vital pivot when the department moves from concept to execution. And as long as the saying goes, the devil really is in the details. So the lion's share of the CDAO duties were previously held by the Chief Information Officer. The future success will depend in part on the clear delineation of responsibilities between the CIO and the CDAO. These are positions whose responsibilities will persistently sit adjacent to one another. It is critical that these lanes of the road are clear not only to one another, but the department, the rest of the executive branch, congressional oversight committees, and our international partners and allies. In addition to this delineation, I am eager to hear how the CDAO will organize its efforts. In inheriting three separate entities in the JAKE, Defense Digital Service, and the Chief Data Officer, the CDAO is poised to develop exciting new constructs and build expertise across teams that have previously been siloed. For instance, we have seen how critical good data principles are to building useful artificial intelligence models. Hence, it only stands to reason that the CDAO would be thinking about new ways to align the teams that had previously worked these problems in separate silos. So finally, I hope to hear how both the CIO and the CDAO will be working with the services. While we finally have empowered CIOs within each of the military departments, there are not natural parallels for the CDAO. So will the CDAO's engagement with the services be directed at their CIOs, or are there other more suitable positions for the CDAO to work with? There are many historical comparisons to show that all of the best efforts within the Office of the Secretary of Defense can be quickly stymied without commensurate efforts by the services. Again, I'm excited to hear about all of these matters and more. But before proceeding, I want to remark briefly about Mr. Sherman and his CIO team. So here, I wanted to say that when he was with us last year, I put a spotlight on the frustration that the subcommittee was dealing with, specifically in transparency on the budget request and information technology matters with his office. So in the year since, under John's leadership, we have seen a remarkable transformation when it comes to transparency, increased responsiveness, congressional inquiries, and the timely delivery of products required by law. Too often, it falls on Congress to point out the shortfalls or failings of the Department of Defense. But when deserved, we should also acknowledge its successes. And I commend John and his team for its track record over the last year, and I thank you for your efforts. So with that, I want to thank our witnesses for appearing before us today, and I'll turn now to Ranking Member Banks for his remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses who are here with us today and for joining us on short notice. Mr. Sherman, as CIO for the Department of Defense, you are responsible for a significant number of programs: cloud adoption, IT networks, data policies, spectrum management, cybersecurity, and more. All of these things are critical to the warfighter, and we don't take that lightly. Secure, effective technology can revolutionize how the department conducts its business, but investments in IT infrastructure are necessary to do so. I'm encouraged by the progress that you've made in the last year, but I fear there is still a long road ahead. I also have been disappointed in the delays to award contracts in the Joint Warfighter Cloud Capability Program. I think the creation of the Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Officer was a wise move to help the department better use and deploy AI at scale. But the value of that move won't be realized for months, as Dr. Mattel is not yet in place. With an enterprise as large and diverse as the DoD, modernization and security is a difficult task. You need the buy-in not just from the highest levels of the DoD, but everyone who logs on to a DoD network. You also need a capable workforce to acquire and deploy it, as well as train the rest of the workforce on how to use it. Without strong investments, strategic vision, diligence in implementation, and accountability, we risk weakening the department's security, which is unacceptable. I look forward to our conversation today about how to continue the progress that you have made and to expand upon it. And with that, thank you. I yield back.
Very good. Thank you, Ranking Member Banks, for your remarks. As a point of order, while we have three witnesses joining us today, we will have Mr. Sherman deliver opening remarks, and during the question portion, we will ask that he turn to his colleagues as he sees fit for remarks and answers. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Sherman for 5 minutes of remarks. Your full statement can be submitted for the record, and ask you to summarize your remarks for 5 minutes. Mr. Sherman, please proceed. We need to have your microphone on, Mr. Sherman. I can't hear you. Nothing yet. Okay, I'm going to have to ask staff to intervene here and figure out the technical issues here.
Wait. Chairman Langevin, sir. All right. Looks like we're hot now.
You've got it. Yep. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, sir. Good morning, Chairman Langevin, Ranking Member Banks, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. As you noted, with me is Dr. Kelly Fletcher, our Principal Deputy Chief Information Officer, who can help provide insight on our resources and budget, among other topics, and Ms. Margie Palmieri, our Deputy Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Officer, who will help me speak on the stand-up of this exciting new office. Chairman Langevin, I would first like to thank you for your past 22 years.
Mr. Chairman, if you could please pause for a minute. We have technical.
The key. Okay, we're hot again. Chairman Langevin, I would first like to thank you for your past 22 years of public service to our nation. Your leadership has positively impacted all of the Department of Defense, from the civilian workforce to our women and men in uniform. I appear before you today as the DoD CIO and the acting Cdao. With your support, we have made strong progress since I testified before you last June, and I look forward to updating the subcommittee on our achievements and the recent establishment of the Cdao. Moreover, as we discuss investments today, I want to assure you that both the CIO and Cdao budgets are fully informed by the President's vision, policies, and strategies, including the interim National Security Strategic Guidance and the Department's National Defense Strategy. The Department has made significant strides to unlock the power of its data, harness AI, and provide digital solutions to the joint force. Going forward, there is a need for stronger alignment to accelerate decision advantage and generate advanced capabilities for our warfighters as we face China as a pacing challenge, an increasingly aggressive Russia, and as our adversaries adapt to technology innovation. In December 2021, Deputy Secretary of Defense Hicks established a Cdao to serve as the department's senior official responsible for strengthening and integrating data, AI, and digital solutions across the defense enterprise. Integrating the standalone data and AI organizations into the CDAO is a multi-step process that began on the 1st of February and will reach full operating capability on the 1st of June. While the DoD CIO will continue to lead core infrastructure functions, including cybersecurity, cloud, transport, and networks, the CDAO will help set requirements and provide strategy, policy, and governance of data, analytics, and AI. This office will provide enterprise-level infrastructure and services that enable efforts to advance adoption of these critical areas. The CDAO will work closely with our team in CIO and other components within the department to ensure mission success. As the CDAO focuses on organizing and carrying out their mission, I will continue my attention as a CIO on enterprise-level priorities such as cybersecurity, cloud computing, software modernization, and warfighting command control and communications, or C3. We've been able to move forward in these areas through robust governance and teamwork to include with the military departments. In cybersecurity, I'm committed to ensure protection of the Department of Defense Information Network, or DODIN, implementing zero trust, hardening the SIPRNet, addressing 20-plus years of technical debt on our systems, securing the defense industrial base, and enhancing our cyber and digital talent. Of course, cloud computing remains a fundamental component of the department's global IT infrastructure. To that end, I will ensure that we provide modern enterprise cloud capabilities to enable everything from software modernization to enhanced user experience at every classification level. Finally, turning to C3, I remain driven to modernize our positioning, navigation, and timing, or P&T, capabilities, lead the department on the electromagnetic spectrum operations, or EMSO, development, move forward on 5G while ensuring DoD equities remain protected and also providing economic opportunities for U.S. industry, strengthening transport, and ensuring national leader command capabilities. In closing, I thank this subcommittee for its consistent and dedicated support in these and countless other areas. It would truly not be possible without your strong partnership and guidance. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning, and we look forward to your questions.
Very good. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your remarks. With that, we'll now proceed with questions. Each member shall be recognized for 5 minutes, beginning with myself. With that, Mr. Sherman, can you speak to the efforts underway not only to define the role and responsibilities of the Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Officer, but also to account for and revise historical policies and directives that may designate or outline roles for the CIO, which may now more appropriately be handled by the CDAO?
Yes, sir. I will start with this and then turn to Ms. Palmieri for some amplifying comments. We've had a robust effort underway since IOC on the 1st of February to bring the new organization together, identifying leaders, ensuring employees know where they go in the new structure, and really getting the most synergy out of this new AI, data, digital services alignment together with this. A lot of work, sir, has gone into this in terms of defining roles, getting our workflow together, and using real-world opportunities, such as with the operation supporting the Ukraine crisis, to bring things like the Advana team to bear, to supporting U.S. Transportation Command and U.S. European Command. So real-world operations to drive the way ahead on that. Additionally, working with the Director of Administration and Management, or DA&M, at the Pentagon under Mr. Mike Donnelly, former SecAF, doing all the pick and shovel work, updating the policies, updating the paperwork that identified CIO previously on some areas to put CDAO in the right parts of the documentation, and then also looking at things like the finances in terms of some of the former historical relationship with the Joint AI Center and DISA and so on, and making sure we do the blocking and tackling to align and empower the new CDA organization. And sir, with that, I'd like to turn to Ms. Palmieri briefly, and hopefully your mic's hot there. If not, I'll give you mine.
Let's see. Yep. Thanks, sir, for the question. As part of the CDAO stand-up, we have established a governance working group, and they are looking through over 40 different foundational documents that reference either the pre-existing organizations before CDAO or other roles and responsibilities that CDAO is taking over. And so we're looking at that holistically and looking at governance specifically and all the different working groups in the department. I think we found about 21 that had oversight on some of our issues. We've been able to streamline those in the near term and take them down, actually reducing the level of bureaucracy around some of these issues and getting some more clarity on them. Thanks.
Very good, thank you. So in my my opening remarks, I noted questions about how the DoD CIO and the CDAO will collaborate together and deconflict their work with the military services. So can you elaborate on that more? Can you speak to your initial thoughts on this matter, and specifically who the right interlocutors are within the military departments for the CDAO, and if it's the services CIOs, how can the CIO and the CDAO proactively think through how to minimize the potential for OSD overload, given the service CIO's relatively small size?
Yes, sir. So as a first step is to capitalize on the very well-established relationships we already have through CIO channels, as you note, sir, with the services and MilDep CIOs, to be able to use our established governance processes, the teaming we have, certainly not to overload them, but to use the very well-established processes we have in place. Matter of fact, we were doing something this week on coordinating some material with the CIOs. The other thing, the chief data officers who work for the service CIOs have a very established relationship on the data side of things through data governance councils that we can tap into. Now, with the AI aspect, this is probably an area that we need to reinforce. There's a lot of AI going on in the services under the military departments, that we have some established governance there, much of which goes to the CIOs, but not all of it. And that's an opportunity for us that we need to tighten that up as well. So in a nutshell, working through the CIOs so far has given us a successful ingress point, but when Dr. Martell gets here working with Ms. Palmieri, this is an area that, as we really get up on our skis with this, need to refine a bit, ensuring, as you note, sir, that we don't overload a process and that we're getting to the right humans in each of the components to get the answers we need on whether it's operations or responsible AI or unlocking the power of the data. Margie, would you add anything to that?
No, I think that hits it very accurately. I think the other piece about this is, mission owners are across the department and not just within the data or CIO lane. And so a lot of the work that Mr. Sherman talked about that we've been able to do in support of Ukraine has been with the Joint Staff J4 and the logistics community, or with UCOM's team on logistics. And so the partnerships with the mission owners is also very critical. And I think we've gotten great support from people that want to use data and analytics as we work the broader issues through the CDO and CIO channels.
Thank you for those answers. I'm going to hold. I have additional questions. Hopefully, we'll get to a second round, or I'll sit them for the record. But for now, I want to yield to Ranking Member Banks for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few years ago, Vladimir Putin proclaimed that, quote, "Artificial intelligence is the future. Whoever becomes the leader in this sphere will become the ruler of the world." While there have been some useful but limited AI programs, such as Project Maven, that have gotten to some scale and now transition, the DoD still needs a scalable enterprise capability for the integrated deployment of AI technologies for joint warfighting missions. Ms. Palermi, what are your plans as Deputy CDAO to accelerate, scale, and transition an AI-enabled warfighting capability?
Yes, sir. Thanks for the question. Part of the remit of the CDAO is to look at both the enabling infrastructure, the analytic tools, and the the tools that people will use to develop AI, and then the responsible AI ethics and testing and evaluation processes to make sure that the United States is doing this in accordance with established ethical considerations. So much of our budget in the FY23 cycle and FY22 cycle is focused on bringing that core enabling enterprise capability. So that includes the computing platform, the tools, and then the data policies that will enable us to access different data from across the department to really bring that together and enable either analytics or ultimately artificial intelligence to be able to support decision makers with decision advantage. And so one of the key initiatives under that is the Deputy Secretary of Defense's AI and Data Acceleration Initiative, or ADA. This is an area where we've put significant investment in both talent and money to go out to the combatant commanders and some of the principal staff assistants inside of the department in charge with business operations and support them with experts, digital experts, data experts, as well as bring some of our established capabilities in Invana. This is our business health system, and in Project Maven on the AI side, and scale that at the combatant commanders more broadly, share those lessons across COCOMs, and then bring that back to identify the barriers that we have to enable across the department.
Very good. Mr. Sherman, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I am concerned by the delays in awarding contracts for the JWCC. Has the department considered using a rolling date for compliance for providers instead of one set date, the end of December?
No, sir, we have not considered a rolling date, but I can assure you getting this right and getting this done by the end of this calendar year is among my very top priorities. Sir, I think you're referencing when I rolled this out when I was the acting last year, that we were aiming for April for an award date, but part of this, and I'll own this here, was we haven't done this at this scale, and when we had did the initial review, that we had 4 vendors make the cut, that we had estimated too quickly on the date. So December, working with the team between our team in CIO, DISA, Washington Headquarters Services, with support from Acquisition Sustainment, with all the advice on the procurement experts and the way we're proceeding with the awards aiming for December. But sir, we recognize this is critically important. We appreciate the committee's support here, recognizing what the JEDI cancellation and how important this is for the CDAO efforts, for Joint All-Domain Command and Control, and so much of what we're doing for warfighting. So, sir, I will assure you we're getting after this with alacrity.
Can you talk a little bit more about the task order process that you envision for JWCC?
Yes, sir. The way that we're going to do this, there will have to be on each of, depending upon how many vendors do make the cut on this, excuse me, to be able to have, there will be individual task orders that will have to go in, but the upshot of what we did learn from JEDI was a process that our hosting and compute center team, HACK, up at the DISA headquarters, came up with to be able to expedite this so users do not have to take an incredibly long time to compete task orders against whichever kind of best athlete cloud they want to use. It's called ADAT is what they call it. So we do have an established process there to use these IDIQ contracts, but to be able to have expedited task orders to depend on what the workload and mission is for that, sir.
Okay, just a couple more questions. Can you provide an example of a commercial technology solution that the department has adopted that's been successful?
I think we've had plenty. I think a lot of it's in the cybersecurity realm, sir. I'll start there, but I could go to others, such as with Comply to Connect, such as what we're doing for endpoint security, such as what we're doing on software-defined networks, not only for security matters, but on areas like 5G. I think there's a number of areas on command and control I could go into on Spectrum, hitting on that have been commercial technologies we've been able to use. And cloud already exists extensively in the department at the service level, such as with Cloud One, Sea Army, Black Pearl in the Navy. There's been a lot of commercial innovation there, and as well as with software, quite a bit of commercial software usage across the department. What my job as CIO is not only to encourage and cultivate that, but to make sure we can make this work at an enterprise level, such as with JWCC, such as supporting Cdao. But sir, there have been a number of key technologies we have rapidly integrated and employed for our warfighter and other support.
Just one final question. Our national security depends on resilience across the defense industrial base. I know you know that because your office has rightfully taken on an increased role in this arena. How are you leveraging AI to grapple with the size and scale of the DIB attack surface and the speed at which we need to identify and remediate vulnerabilities?
So that is one area that with the Cdao now standing up that I want to work with Dr. Martell and work with Ms. Palmieri on. I can tell you at an unclassified level, there is some of this as we work with our colleagues at Cybercom and NSA employing AI capabilities to be able to get after some of this. But this is an area as we look at big data platform, as we look across an enterprise. Now you're talking about DIB, not the DOD, so I need to make sure I focus my remarks on that. These are areas that we look at the 220,000 companies in the DIB, and particularly as we look at cyber maturity model certification employment, I want to make this understandable and usable, particularly to small and medium businesses. So while not instantiated yet, we're looking at areas to where we can possibly use some government cloud capabilities to be able to put data in from these companies if we can do this properly and with the proprietary considerations to be able to help these companies out where we can run analytics and lessen the burden on those small and medium-sized companies out across the United States and not make this too cumbersome on them. So this is an area we need to work on, sir, but it's definitely on my radar to do so.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the ranking member. Chair now recognizes Mr. Moulton for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to pick up with Ms. Palmieri in answering your questions to the questions of Ranking Member Banks. You mentioned that when you bring forward new AI capabilities, you have to ensure their employment meets our ethical norms and standards. This is, of course, exactly what we would expect, but do you believe that our adversaries adhere to the same ethical standards?
Yes, sir, thanks. Not in all cases. We know that there are nations that do not respect the privacy of citizens and do not necessarily use that information that they get in a way that meets our ethical principles. Our 5 ethical principles are that we use AI responsibly, that we take steps for it to be equitable, which means we minimize unintended consequences associated with our capabilities, that our methods are traceable. This means that we can audit them. We know how the AI was developed. It's reliable, that there are well-defined use cases, and we know what the AI is good at and what it is not good at, and we have a testing and assurance cycle associated with that. And that it's governable, and that we know that it does its intended functions, and if it doesn't do those intended functions, we can either deactivate the system or take it offline. Those are very important to us. We're working on a responsible AI strategy right now in the last few weeks of coordination across the department, where we're going to take those principles and actually put them into implementation action. And so,
well, I tell you that, I mean, as fellow Americans, we certainly agree with those ethical standards, and this is what we would expect of you and of us. But I think it's patently obvious to all of us that China and Russia, our principal adversaries, are not going to adhere to these standards. They don't, and we can see this playing out in Ukraine every day. And therefore, their AI won't as well. I'm confident that their AI is being trained to do heinous things, or at the very least, pay little regard for civilian casualties and collateral damage, which will almost certainly make their AI more deadly and effective. Everything you just described is the right thing to do, but there are constraints on these AI weapons. So in an AI versus AI battle, they'll have a massive advantage because they won't constrain their weapons in the ethical ways we do. So the point that I'm making is that we have to do work on developing an international agreement to codify these standards. So it's not just us who are following them. And then we at least have some hope of ensuring our adversaries' worst instincts are at least to some degree constrained. Now, not every nation abides by the Geneva Convention, but we know across the world that it does matter and it does help. So just as when the world came to terms with the horrors of chemical weapons in World War I, and the Geneva Convention was the result, I think this is a second Geneva Convention moment. Now, this is not your responsibility. I get that this is basically falls under the State Department. But I don't think enough people in state appreciate how important this is. And as one of the leaders in our government on the use and employment of AI, I would strongly encourage you to help mount an effort to work on this broader problem. Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, sir, absolutely. In fact, we have a partnership for defense organization right now with 16 nations. They include our Five Eyes partners, many of our partners out of NATO, and some others like Israel, Finland, Sweden. This is absolutely an interest area of all of those nations that we have started with, but absolutely take your point on a broader effort, and that is worth pursuing. Thanks.
I mean, this is one of the principal recommendations that came out of the Future Defense Task Force that Representative Ranking Member Banks and I co-chaired. And look, ultimately, if you do this right, we're not only doing the right thing in terms of humanity, but we're figuring out ways that we do this to our advantage. Because I think, as I've just described, we are at a disadvantage right now because our adversaries will not be so constrained. I had another question coming from the results and the recommendations of our Future Defense Task Force report on the need to update our acquisition process for this new era of technology, where we're not just acquiring hardware, but acquiring software. And our acquisition system is really not built to acquire software. It's a different animal. We won't have time to answer that question right now, but that's something that I'd like to take for the record and look forward to your response. Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Moulton. Mr. Franklin is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Actually, my line of questioning was going to be right along with what Representative Moulton was starting to get into there with the acquisition process. And Mr. Chairman, I noticed, in your testimony, you talked about the CDAO offering 5 decentralized procurement vehicles for rapid AI delivery and purchasing of key AI services and enabling tools. A mouthful, but sounds like a lot of new ways to try to improve this process. We know, as has already been noted, AI is so integral to the future, our future success. It cuts across all areas of DoD, but the struggle is how do we innovate fast enough to keep up with the threat? And we don't have traditionally our acquisition system just is not tailored to that. I'd love for you to take the time that I have here to, you and your team, maybe expand on these 5 different vehicles and help us understand that this is a good thing and we're not just creating more bureaucracy, and particularly for small businesses, because I speak with a lot of them who have great ideas, but it's just so difficult to navigate the process that by the time they could get something to market, it's already passed them by.
Sir, I will start with that and then turn to Ms. Palmieri and Dr. Fletcher for amplifying comments. Software acquisition and working on that, of course, it is both within the CIO and CDAO realm to be a driver for that, but it really is going to be a team effort working with acquisition and sustainment, research and engineering, with our colleagues in the military departments and services, but to use the authorities that Congress has already granted us in terms of how we can use kind of different approaches to this, but also how we think differently about employing software, acquiring software, developing software ourselves, moving to development, security operations, DevSecOps approaches, leveraging open source software, and moving at pace, as you've noted, sir, to not have historic ways of coming at this, but to be able to move at high speeds. And then really what I see sitting up at OSD, there's so much innovation occurring within the department, in the military services, at the commands, to jump on that, not try to recreate the wheel, but elevate that. And there's been so many great examples we've seen, out at the very tip of the spear too, out at the sub-unified commands and so on. So that's one thing we're trying to do, is not over-govern this, but take these great examples of this. And as looking from the acquisition optics, sir, as I mentioned earlier on Ranking Member Banks' question about small and medium businesses, this keeps me up a lot, making sure not to take away from the, quote, bigs, but those companies out all throughout the United States, and not to have high barriers of entry where we can get their products, their capabilities into the system quickly. So this is a priority for me as CIO. If I can, I'd like to turn to Ms. Palmieri briefly from the CDAO optic on the 5 areas, sir, you were noting. Margie?
Yes, sir. First of all, thank you very much for Section 808 and the NDAA that gave acquisition authority to the JAIC that is now inherited by CDAO. We don't owe an implementation plan to Congress, which will come this summer, on how we're going to go after that. But the 5 vehicles that the JAIC created were specifically focused on the areas of data and AI, all with an agile approach, and this idea that organizations outside of CDAO could come and leverage these contracts as enterprise contracts. And so Real briefly, the first one is a trade wins. It's another transaction agreement, which gives us a very agile approach to focus on mission capabilities. We have about 63% of those awardees right now that are either small business or non-traditional defense contractors. There's another one for data readiness that's specifically on data engineers, data labelers. This one's really great because you can customize the different performance work statements based off of your needs. And we see about 50% of those awardees right now being small business or non-traditional. There's a vehicle on test and evaluation that provides simplified acquisition procedures for test and evaluation. And we have about 40 or so, about 50% small business versus large business there. We have a contract vehicle for acquiring contract talent to support AI development. 6 vendors on that one. It's relatively small now. All small businesses, but we have a lot of interest there, and so we're looking at how to scale up that vehicle. And then the last one is a commercial solutions offering, which is generally no money involved, but it allows businesses across the board to come in and pilot or demo their capabilities on government data, which is a huge asset to small companies. The government's able to provide feedback on their capabilities, and they get access to our data to test out their ideas. We have about 4,000 different companies that are eligible for those types of contracts, and then we're doing more with outreach and partnering with nonprofits to try to do a better set of market research on who's out there, so we're not just going to the same vendors.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Franklin. Mr. Moore is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, witnesses, for being here. Thanks for your context. I think we can all agree that artificial intelligence is rapidly transforming our world, even sometimes without our knowledge. Industry's on the cusp of some very key scientific breakthroughs. These will disrupt our daily lives. Disruption in a good way should be celebrated. Autonomous vehicles, smart homes, all this type of stuff. This is going to be ubiquitous. And while much of it gives us something to look forward to, there is an inherent risk that can be mitigated if the United States, if we're the global leader in AI, we can mitigate the risk that is essentially going to come from this, and just don't trust other nations to properly fill this role. Mr. Sherman and Ms. Palmieri, welcome comments from either of you. America's greatest strategic advantage against near-peer competition, one of the major advantages is that we remain a country that the world's #1 destination for immigrants and a strong immigrant workforce. As long as talented people want to come here and to innovate and start their businesses, the U.S. can't be beat. While primarily technology-focused organizations, the CIO and Cdao require that people are proficient in policy, economics, ethics, data science, and the law. How do both organizations ensure they are optimally staffed, considering increased competition in recruitment and retention?
Thank you, sir. I'll start with that, then I'll ask Ms. Palmieri to chime in. So looking at digital and cyber talent writ large, which all is kind of coming together on this, both between CIO and Cdao, as I mentioned to this committee last year, recognizing talent is so critical. I launched a new cyber talent strategy, which we're aiming to publish in the August-September timeframe of this year, which will have a close nexus to Cdao that's going to help us think differently about not only using the authorities this committee and rest of Congress has granted to us on areas like cyber accepted service, and also capitalizing on what we've done to think about our current workforce through the Defense Cyber Workforce Framework and using our 8140 policy series and doing all this blocking and tackling behind the scenes work we need to do. But also, as we have a more dynamic workforce that's going to come in and out of government in a way that may not go to a 30-year career, how do we compete with industry partners with whom we need to have a partnership on to be able to have digital advantage to very sophisticated adversaries, as you note, in a near peer and peer competitor fight. So that's what we're doing from the CIO side. CDAO specifically is going to be looking at AI, data, and digital talent in that regard. So it's going to be a close partnership with CIO. So for that, I'd like to turn to Ms. Palmieri to talk to what we're doing on the CDAO front.
Sure, absolutely. So the CDAO, as it has brought together these different organizations across the department, is about 200 to 300. It's about 250 people total. More than half of whom are technical in some way. They have digital services expertise, computer scientists, or some level of AI or data science background. And so I'm actually very excited about where we are right now as an organization and the talent that we have in that organization. On the military side as well, we're leveraging existing communities like the operational research community, which is heavily data and analytic focused. But then we also have an element of our team that is specifically looking at talent management for the entire department and how we go after talent management there. Things like how we first train and educate our people to be data literate, but then also develop skills in developing analytic and AI skills as well. But then also how do we track them throughout the department and work that into promotions and the things that we value for opportunities for leadership. Thanks.
Awesome. And can you also touch on, does the DoD and the intelligence community have adequate information about, obviously we're in an open setting, so it's not a classified setting, but do we have adequate information about the state of foreign military AI applications and the ways that those could be harmful to U.S. national security? And are we, and more importantly, are we investing in ways to defend us and defend our nation against these applications?
Sir, at a high level, as you noted, an unclassified session, I can say that working with our colleagues in intelligence and security and INS under Honorable Moultrie and with the intelligence community, this does remain a key topic and robustly focused on. That's what I can say with that. And in terms of working with adversary, or not working with, but defending against adversary capabilities, that is something that is very much on our radar, both from the CDAO side, but as I implement on the CIO side, things like zero trust cybersecurity and getting after technical debt that's critical, that is very much something we focus on. And our partnership with the intelligence community, for example, working with my colleague General Nakasone at NSA and Cybercom, is something that is very prominent in our discussion. So we do work on this a lot together.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Is Mr. Kim there? Okay. So that's our first round of questioning. We're going to go to a second round of concurrence with the ranking member. So with that, let me recognize myself. With regards to structuring the CDAO, can you speak to initial views on possible constructs? How much is notional at this point, particularly the incoming CDAO, Mr. Martel, is reportedly only a few weeks from starting. What are your thoughts on that?
Sir, our organization is pretty solid at this point, and actually it doesn't look terribly dissimilar from CIO, where we have deputy CIOs. We have, in addition to Ms. Palmieri as the principal deputy CDAO, we have 5 deputy CDAOs organized functionally on areas like acquisition, policy, enterprise capability, warfighting support, and digital services. Those are the 5, as well as a separate unit under Dr. Pinellas that's looking at responsible AI, artificial intelligence. And then this is bringing these organizations together, Cdao, the Joint AI Center, Defense Digital Services, and then organizing functionally on these areas. We've already begun to do this with the officers, the employees going to their new integrated units to get after some of the things Ms. Palmieri talked about on support to the Ukraine crisis. So actually, sir, we have a pretty well-honed organization now. We're still working on some final pieces of that, but the organization has come together. And again, in the point that Dr. Martell and Ms. Palmieri be working is creating a team of teams. It is a new organization, breaking down some institutional barriers we had, bringing folks together. And we are seeing this, for example, with the AI and Data Accelerator, the ADA teams that Ms. Palmieri noticed, supporting the commands and also back at the Pentagon. So the wheels are turning on this, and we do have a very strong foundation for the new organization. Margie, anything you'd like to add?
No, I think that's great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Very good. So I know we talked about cloud in some of the line of questions that you touched on. Is there anything else you want to do in terms of give us something of where we are to creating and shifting over to an enterprise cloud system? Obviously, since the Jedi failure to execute or to come up with a final decision there, and now we're moving to something hopefully similar, but without the challenges and protests and all that. But anything you want to add there?
Sir, only that, just to amplify what I said, this is so critical. Sir, you brought this up from here in your position. We've gotten that message loud and clear. And also, not only with not having protests, but a multi-cloud, multi-vendor approach, which is more consistent with industry standard at this time. And then once we have the procurement completed, using it. Using the capabilities, using the tasking mechanism that Ranking Member Banks asked me about for the task orders, and really having something that spans the entire enterprise from the continental United States to the tactical edge, and having that compute capability to support warfighting needs, as well as AI and other needs on that with world-class capabilities from U.S. vendors, which I really do see as a national advantage for the United States, whether it's in an Indo-PACOM scenario or EUCOM or anywhere else, to get this in place and really figure out all the capabilities. And this will be a little bit of a journey of learning, the same as our intelligence community partners are doing in their multi-cloud environment, with whom we're working closely on lessons learned and how that's working. So this is critically important, sir.
Good. Well, it's a higher priority for me and the subcommittee, and I know it is for you. So we'll look forward to following the progress on this over time. If I could, over the last few years, the cybersecurity maturation model certification, or CMMC, received significant public attention. However, in the last year, we haven't heard much about the program's development. So can you please update us on where CMMC stands and how it is progressing?
Yes, sir. I'll make one brief comment, and then I'd like to turn to Dr. Fletcher, because she's been instrumental in helping guide this. We realize we're at what's called CMMC 2.0, which we launched last fall after the initial startup of this. One of my main goals as CIO is to make sure this is rationalized, understandable, and back to the earlier points that Representative Franklin and others brought up about small and medium businesses all across the U.S., to make this understandable so this is not overly burdensome, but also is able to protect the controlled unclassified information, CUI data, in contracts. Dr. Fletcher, would you like to add to that, please?
Yes, sure. Thank you, sir. So right now we're reworking the rules. So there's a lot of work happening, but it's behind the scenes. Those rules will go to OMB, and then they'll be available for public comment in March of 23. So folks will have the opportunity to say, this is onerous or this is about right. And then we may see CMMC in contracts as early as summer 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fletcher. I appreciate that. So for my final question, I'm concerned that the department is not adequately focusing on electromagnetic spectrum operations. I think it's a concern for many. The FY22, the 2022 NDAA required the department to designate a senior official to be responsible for the electromagnetic spectrum superiority strategies implementation plan. Can you tell us what is the status of that implementation plan and the leadership structure? And what barriers do you see to the strategy's successful implementations?
Yes, sir. So within CIO, we took the baton on this from Joint Staff last fall in terms of being the overall integrator and lead in the department. But as you note, EMSO, electromagnetic spectrum operations, is so critical for near-peer and peer competitor fights as we potentially have to ready our forces to fight in highly contested environments that we haven't had to do for many years. And also bringing together the electronic warfare community and the spectrum operations community into a very necessary integration. So to your question, what we're doing from our Deputy CIO for Command and Control Communications as the overarching lead on this to make sure we're looking at governance, funding, standards, very important as we're working with this, but this is a team of team efforts, very diverse here, working with the services, the weapons platform leaders and owners, and then, for example, working with U.S. Strategic Command. I was just talking to Admiral Richard about this very topic last week about how we need to be hand in glove working together given his combatant command responsibility on this. So, sir, we've moved out on this. We're setting the governance structures in place and making sure that we have all the different wheels turning. This necessarily can't be hyper-centralized, but we do need someone to quarterback this, which will be us. But it is going to require extensive coordination to include with joint staff as well to make sure all these different pieces, and again, the marriage of EW and spectrum operations, which I don't think we've really ever quite done at this level, gets fully implemented.
Very good. I appreciate that, and thank you for those answers and the testimony here today. Those are the questions that I had at this point. So with that, let me just thank you, Mr. Sherman, Ms. Palmieri, and Dr. Fletcher. Appreciate the work you're doing on behalf of the men and women of the DoD and the Warfighter. We are working hard together on these issues. Look forward to future and further conversations and engagements. And with that, I believe that there are no further questions from members. If that is correct, we'll stop here. And as of now, the hearing stands adjourned.